The battlefield was covered in smoke and fire. Broken machines lay scattered across the ground, and the sky was filled with the sound of weapons and screams. Among the chaos, a single figure walked with calm steps, her armor shining like black glass under the burning sun. She was Commander Saria, the most feared warrior of the alien army, a legend whose armor was said to be unbreakable. No human weapon had ever pierced her defenses. Generals told stories of soldiers who tried and failed, their blades shattered like fragile glass against her chest. To the humans, she was a nightmare given form. To her people, she was victory itself. But today, something different was waiting for her. A young human soldier stood at the edge of the battlefield, his armor cracked, his hands trembling around the handle of an old steel blade. The sword was dented and rusted, nothing like the advanced weapons used by others. Yet his eyes carried a fire, a stubborn light that refused to fade. His name was Kale, and though he was no general, no champion, he had come to fight for something greater than glory. He had come to fight for his family, for Earth, and for the memory of every fallen friend. Saria saw him and laughed, the sound echoing across the burning ground like thunder. "Is this what humanity sends me now?" she asked, her voice sharp and filled with contempt. "One man with a broken blade?" Her soldiers laughed with her, their metallic voices carrying mockery through the smoke. Kale said nothing. He lifted his sword slowly, the weight of it pulling on his tired arm. But his eyes did not move from hers, and in that silence he spoke louder than any words. Saria felt a small spark of irritation, a feeling she had not known for years. How could a weak human dare to look at her with such defiance? She raised her weapon, a spear made of alien crystal, glowing with deadly energy. The ground cracked beneath her as she charged, her speed terrifying. Kale braced himself, his heart pounding like a drum. Every instinct told him to run, but he held his ground. He had promised himself he would never run again, not after losing everything. The clash came like thunder. Her spear struck against his blade, and the force of it sent shock waves through the air. Kale was thrown back, his boots carving deep lines into the dirt. But when he looked at his blade, it was still whole. Saria's eyes narrowed, for even the strongest metals had broken under her weapon. Yet this rusted human sword remained. Kale attacked, his movements clumsy but driven by desperate will. His blade rang against her armor again and again, each strike echoing like a bell of defiance. Saria countered easily, her spear moving like lightning. But something inside her shifted. This fight was not like the others. This human fought not with skill, but with unyielding spirit. And for the first time, she felt the weight of her armor as if it were chains. The soldiers around them paused, their laughter fading into silence. They watched as their commander and the human clashed, again and again. Each strike was a storm, each clash a tremor in the ground. Kale's arms shook, blood ran from his cuts, but he kept fighting. Every strike of his sword screamed a message. "I will not give up." Then it happened. Kale swung with every last ounce of strength. His blade struck her chest, and the impossible became real. A crack appeared across her black armor, thin but visible, shining like a scar in the light. The battlefield froze. The alien soldiers gasped in disbelief. Saria looked down at the crack, her eyes wide with shock. Never in all her battles had anyone done this. For the first time in centuries, she felt pain, a sharp sting against her skin. She stepped back, her hand brushing over the damaged armor. Her pride trembled inside her. The humans had always been weak, always beneath her. But this one man, with a broken sword and bleeding hands, had done the unthinkable. Kale dropped to one knee, gasping for air, his body barely able to move. Yet he raised his sword once more, the blade shaking in his grip. Saria stared at him, her expression unreadable. Was it anger? Was it fear? Or was it respect? The battlefield waited in silence. The war itself seemed to hold its breath. The human soldier had cracked the armor of the unbreakable commander. And in that moment, Both warrior and legend realized the same truth. Her greatest weakness was never steel. Saria stood still, her hand pressing against the crack in her armor. It was only a thin line, but to her it felt like a wound deeper than any blade could cut. For centuries, she had been the symbol of strength, the unbreakable wall that humans could never cross. But now, in front of her soldiers and the burning sky, a single human had broken that legend. Her pride roared inside her chest, louder than the battle around them. This was not supposed to happen, not in her story, not in her reign as the undefeated commander. She glared at Kale, the human who still knelt with his broken sword, bleeding yet refusing to fall. The sight burned in her mind like a scar. Her army shifted uneasily, whispers running through their ranks. They had never seen their commander wounded, never seen her bleed. The silence among them was heavier than the smoke. It was the silence of doubt, and Saria felt it like a chain tightening around her neck. She took a step forward, her spear crackling with energy. The ground trembled beneath her weight, but something in her movements was different now. There was no laughter, no contempt, only a rising storm of anger and disbelief. Kale looked up at her, sweat and blood dripping down his face, his chest heaving as he forced himself to stand again. His legs shook, but his eyes burned like fire. "Why do you not fall?" Saria's voice carried across the battlefield, sharp as her spear. "Every warrior stronger than you has fallen. Every sword greater than yours has shattered. Yet you remain." Kale coughed, tasting iron on his lips, but he lifted his blade once more. "I remain," he said, his voice rough but unbroken, "because I must." The simplicity of his words struck her harder than his blade. It was not arrogance, not empty courage, but something deeper. He did not fight for glory, nor for pride. He fought because he had no other choice, because surrender meant losing everything you loved. For the first time in her long life, Saria felt something unfamiliar pressing against her heart. It was not rage, nor fear, but a strange weight she did not want to name. She lunged, her spear flashing like lightning. Kale blocked, barely, the impact sending pain through his arms. The clash echoed again, sparks flying, but this time her eyes did not only see his weakness. They saw his will, his refusal to yield. Her strikes grew heavier, desperate to crush him, desperate to bury the doubt in her chest. But no matter how many times he stumbled, no matter how deep the wounds cut into his flesh, Kale rose again. The human soldiers watching from afar began to stir, their despair lifting as they saw him stand against the unbreakable commander. Hope flickered in their hearts like fire spreading in dry grass. Even the dying lifted their heads to see him fight. One soldier, one broken blade, yet he was carrying the weight of them all. Saria felt the whispers of her army grow louder. Could their unshakable faith in her now crack as easily as her armor had? Her pride screamed, demanding she end this quickly, demanding she prove herself invincible again. But with every swing of Kale's blade, with every defiant step he took, she realized something terrifying. Perhaps her true strength had never been her armor, but the belief of her people in her invincibility. And now that belief was beginning to fracture. Kale staggered forward, his body trembling, his sword raised high, his vision blurred, his breath ragged, yet his steps did not stop. Saria struck again, her spear slicing across his side, blood spraying into the dirt. He gritted his teeth, falling to one knee. Her soldiers cheered, believing the duel over. But then, slowly, painfully, Kale pushed himself back on his feet, his sword once more aimed at her chest. The cheer died instantly. Silence fell like a hammer. Saria stared at him, her pride a raging storm inside her. How could one man stand against her when armies had fallen? How could one broken blade defy a spear that had ended kings and generals? Her chest tightened, her thoughts racing. She realized the truth she had always hidden, the truth she had never wanted to face. Her greatest fear was not death, nor defeat. It was weakness, and this human was forcing her to confront it. The battlefield held its breath again. Saria raised her spear high. Kale tightened his grip. The crack in her armor burned against her chest, a reminder that legends could fall. Her pride was wounded, her spirit shaken, but the fight was far from over. And deep inside, she knew this duel was no longer about victory. It was about who they truly were when the armor finally shattered. The battlefield was silent except for the sound of crackling flames. Saria's soldiers watched with wide eyes, unsure whether to cheer or to tremble. Their commander, the unbreakable warrior of legend, now stood with a crack across her chest plate. The human before her should have been dead long ago, yet he still held his sword, his body shaking but his spirit untouchable. Saria lowered her spear slightly, her gaze fixed on the human. Her pride demanded she crush him immediately, yet something deep within held her back. She could feel the armor pressing against her skin, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in her life, she noticed how much it weighed, not only on her body, but on her soul. Kale's breathing was harsh, his lungs burning. His vision blurred, yet he refused to close his eyes. Through the pain, he saw something strange in her armor. When his blade had cracked it, a faint pulse of light had escaped, almost like a heartbeat. He frowned, tightening his grip on the sword. There was more to her armor than metal, more than alien technology. It was alive, or at least connected to her in a way he could not explain. Saria stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You should not have been able to do this," she said quietly. "No human blade should carry such strength." Kale wiped the blood from his mouth and answered in a voice rough but steady. "It isn't the blade," he said. "It's the will behind it." Her jaw clenched, his words echoing in her mind. For years she had told herself she was invincible because of her armor. But now she began to wonder, was it truly her skill and power, or was it the legend built around her name? Was it the fear in her enemy's eyes that had kept her victorious? And if so, what happened now that one man refused to fear her? Kale staggered a step forward, his sword raised again. The crack in her armor seemed to pulse with light, brighter than before. Saria's eyes widened slightly, because the glow was not her weapon's energy. It was something deeper, a hidden system within her armor she had never seen before. Or perhaps something older, something her people had buried beneath layers of pride and war. The human's blood had stained his sword. As he swung again, sparks danced where metal struck her chest. And for a moment, she felt the strange pull inside her armor respond to him. It was as if his spirit had reached into the core of her defenses, awakening something locked away for centuries. Her soldiers shifted uncomfortably, whispering. They too had seen the strange light, the crack that seemed almost alive. But none dared speak the truth aloud. If their commander's armor was not absolute, if it held secrets even she did not know, then their faith in her strength was already breaking. Saria gritted her teeth, striking back with fury. Her spear lashed like lightning, Kale barely dodging, the heat searing his skin. But as she fought, she felt the pulse again, felt the armor grow heavier. It was no longer only a shield. It was a burden, a reminder that she was not free, that her people had built her into a weapon wrapped in steel. And somewhere inside, she wondered if she was their commander or their prisoner. Kale's sword clashed once more, ringing like a bell. The crack widened slightly, the light inside brighter now. Saria froze, her heart racing. It felt as if the armor itself was rejecting the fight, rejecting her rage. The thought terrified her more than the human's blade. Kale saw her hesitation, and though his body screamed in pain, he pressed forward. "This isn't strength," he rasped. "You're hiding inside a cage." His words cut sharper than any sword. Saria's eyes burned, fury rising not only at him, but at herself. Was she truly the strongest warrior of her race, or just the most armored? The flames around them crackled. The alien soldiers stood silent. Two warriors clashed in the center of the battlefield, but the fight was no longer about armies. It was about truth, about pride, about chains neither of them could see yet both could feel. The armor that had made her a legend was now showing its first secret crack. And Kale, the human with nothing but a broken blade, had seen it. Saria's grip tightened on her spear, her voice low and trembling with fury. "You think you understand me, human, but you do not know what this armor means." Kale raised his sword, his voice steady despite his pain. "Maybe I don't," he said, "but I know this. Armor can break, pride can fall, but spirit never does." Her heart pounded. Her armor throbbed with that unnatural light. The battlefield waited, caught between fear and awe. For the first time in her long life, Commander Saria felt the edges of doubt cut sharper than any weapon. And deep inside her chest, where no blade had ever reached, a truth whispered to her. Her armor was not her strength. It was her prison. The battlefield burned with silence as the two warriors faced each other. The alien army stood frozen, their commander's armor glowing faintly at the crack across her chest. The human soldier, Kale, swayed on his feet, his sword heavy in his trembling hands, but his eyes held fire. Neither spoke, yet the air between them was alive with unspoken words. Saria gripped her spear tighter, the pulse in her armor distracting her. Every strike she had made should have ended this duel, but still the human stood. It was not skill, it was not strength, it was will, and his will would not break. She hated him for it, and, at the same time, she feared him for it. She charged, her spear moving faster than lightning. Kale raised his sword, the impact shattering the ground beneath them. His knees buckled, but his arms did not let go. The force nearly broke him, yet he held on, his teeth gritted, his voice silent but screaming inside. Their weapons clashed again and again, each strike a storm. Her power was overwhelming, her movements like a tempest of rage. But his defiance was steady, his body a wall of blood and pain that refused to fall. The soldiers around them no longer cheered, no longer mocked. They watched in awe, realizing this duel was not about armies, but about something far greater. Saria's mind raged as she fought. She had crushed kings, shattered champions, ended wars with her blade. But this human with a broken sword was undoing her legend with every step he took forward. He was reminding her that victory was not only about weapons. It was about who could endure longer, who could refuse to break when everything else demanded surrender. Kale stumbled, his chest bleeding from another slash. The spear had nearly pierced his heart, but he rolled aside and rose again, coughing blood. His vision dimmed, yet when his eyes met hers, they burned brighter than ever. "You cannot kill what refuses to kneel," his voice rasped, and though weak, it carried across the battlefield like thunder. Her heart pounded, anger twisting into something else, something she did not want to name. Respect. The word echoed inside her mind like a curse. She had mocked him, dismissed him, but now she realized this fight was no longer about strength. It was about spirit, and his spirit was unbreakable. With a snarl, Saria made a choice. She tore pieces of her armor away, the heavy plates crashing to the ground. Gasps rose from her soldiers, disbelief spreading through their ranks. The commander who had never been seen without her armor now stood bare to the fight. Her skin was scarred from countless battles, her muscles hardened by centuries of war. She looked less like a goddess and more like a mortal warrior, and yet her presence was even greater. Kale blinked in surprise, his sword shaking as he steadied it again. She smirked, though there was no mockery this time, only challenge. "You want a duel of wills, human? Then face me without the cage that bound me," she growled, her voice raw and fierce. For the first time, she was not fighting as a legend, not as an untouchable commander. She was fighting as herself, scarred, wounded, and alive. Their blades met again, but the clash was different now. It was no longer armor against steel, but spirit against spirit. Each strike shook the battlefield. Each clash screamed of desperation and pride. Her spear cut the air like fire, his sword cut back like the storm. Both of them bleeding, both of them trembling, yet neither willing to fall. The soldiers watching no longer knew what they were witnessing. It was no longer war, it was something greater, a duel of wills, a clash of souls, the kind of battle that legends are born from. And as Kale's sword scraped against her scarred skin, and her spear tore across his side, both realized the same truth. This was no longer about victory or defeat. It was about proving who they truly were when stripped of armor, when stripped of pride, when left with nothing but will. The fire in Kale's eyes burned brighter. The pulse in Saria's chest grew heavier. And the battlefield itself seemed to bow before the force of their spirits colliding. The night sky cracked with thunder, though no storm had come. The ground shook beneath their feet, though no army advanced. And still they fought, their duel becoming something far greater than war. It was no longer steel against steel, it was heart against heart, and the world would remember it forever. The battlefield glowed red from fire and ash. Saria stood without her heavy armor, her scarred skin exposed to the eyes of both her soldiers and her enemy. For centuries, she had hidden behind the legend of unbreakable steel. Now she fought with nothing but her own strength, her own spirit, her own truth. Kale stared at her, his chest rising and falling with each painful breath. He had expected her to retreat, to repair her armor, to crush him once more with the weight of her legend. Instead, she had stripped it away, choosing to meet him as a warrior, not as a myth. For the first time, Kale saw her not as a monster wrapped in glass and steel, but as a living being, as someone who bled. Her scars told stories older than his lifetime. Each mark across her arms and shoulders was proof of battles fought, victories claimed, and wounds endured. She was no untouchable goddess, no immortal wall. She was like him, carrying the weight of endless struggle, refusing to bow even when broken. Their eyes met across the burning ground, and in that moment, the war around them seemed to vanish. No armies, no imperis, no burners. Only two souls standing against each other, bound by the fire of survival and the chains of pride. Saria raised her spear, but her grip was no longer steady. The strange pulse within her chest had not vanished when the armor fell. It beat louder now, echoing like a second heart. She did not understand it, and that frightened her. Was this strange connection born from his blade, or from the defiance in his spirit? She only knew one thing. The more she fought him, the more she saw herself reflected in his eyes. Kale tightened his grip on the broken sword, his arms screaming in pain. Blood dripped from his side, his vision dimmed, but he refused to let go. When he looked at her now, he saw not just an enemy, but a prisoner of her own legend. He whispered to himself, words no one else could hear. She is not unbreakable, she is just like me. They clashed again, steel against crystal. But the rhythm had changed. It was no longer fury against defiance. It was raw honesty against raw honesty. Her strikes were powerful, but slower, burdened by doubt. His strikes were weaker, but sharper, guided by clarity. Each blow carved away the illusion of who they were supposed to be and revealed who they truly were beneath it all. Saria's chest burned with a strange light, the crack glowing brighter with every strike. It felt as though Kale's sword was not only cutting steel, but reaching inside her. Every swing peeled away layers of pride, layers of fear, until she could no longer deny the truth. Her strength had never been her armor. It had been her will, and that will was now trembling. Kale staggered forward, his sword brushing her side. She did not counter immediately. Instead, she froze. For the first time, she looked at him without hate, without contempt. She saw his bleeding hands, his broken body, his unshakable eyes. And in those eyes, she recognized something she had long forgotten. The same fire she once carried when she had chosen to fight, not for glory, but for survival. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be that this human was reminding her of who she had once been, before the legend, before the chains of expectation. The realization struck deeper than any blade. She was not fighting him anymore. She was fighting herself. The soldiers watching did not understand what they were witnessing. To them, it looked like hesitation, like weakness. But to Saria, it was revelation. Every clash of their weapons was not a step toward victory, but a step toward truth. She could not kill him, not because he was too strong, but because in him she saw the reflection of her own buried heart. Kale raised his sword once more, trembling yet steady. "You're not my enemy," he whispered, his voice breaking through the silence. "You're just like me." The words cut through her chest sharper than any weapon. Her spear lowered slightly, her breathing unsteady, her soldiers gasping at the sight. Commander Saria, the unbreakable warrior, was hesitating. The fire roared around them. The smoke rose high. But between them stood no longer two enemies. There stood two warriors, scarred, broken, yet unwilling to bow to the chains of their past. And in that burning silence, Saria realized her greatest weakness was never steel. It was the possibility of being seen, truly seen. The battlefield had grown strangely quiet. The alien soldiers who once shouted with pride now stood in uneasy silence. The humans who once cowered in fear now lifted their heads, hope flickering in their eyes like sparks in the dark. And at the center of it all, two warriors faced each other with bleeding bodies and unyielding wills. Saria's chest burned with every breath. The crack in her armor glowed like fire, spreading faint light beneath her scarred skin. Her spear trembled in her grip, not from weakness of body, but from the storm inside her heart. For the first time in centuries, she was unsure of who she was. Kale staggered, his body near collapse. His hands bled freely, his sword nearly slipping from his fingers. Every step forward was agony, but he forced himself on. His spirit screamed at him to rise, to move, to fight until he could no longer breathe. Saria watched him come closer, and her heart twisted in confusion. Why did this human not fall? Why did he keep rising when even death seemed to call his name? Her soldiers whispered behind her, their voices carrying fear. Is our commander failing? Is the human winning? What is happening? She wanted to silence them, to crush him once and for all. Her pride demanded it, her legend required it. But her spirit whispered another truth. Perhaps it was not strength to destroy him, but strength to endure him. She lunged forward, her spear slicing the air. Kale barely blocked, his sword shaking from the impact. The strike cut across his arm, tearing flesh, yet still he stood. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I will not kneel." Her eyes widened, because those words echoed the vow she had once spoken long ago. When she was younger, before the armor, before the legend, she too had promised herself never to kneel, never to be broken. Now she saw her old self reflected in him, and it shattered the wall she had built inside her. The duel grew heavier, each strike slower, more desperate. Both warriors swayed on their feet, their strength fading, their breath ragged. Every clash was not only blade against spear, but heart against heart, and still neither of them surrendered. Saria's soldiers no longer shouted. They stood in awe, realizing their commander was no longer untouchable. Their faith cracked like the armor on her chest. For if she could bleed, if she could hesitate, then she was mortal. Kale felt his legs weaken, the weight of exhaustion crashing down. His sword slipped for a moment, nearly falling. But then he thought of the people he fought for, the world behind him, the faces of those who believed in him. And he forced his body to rise once more, his blade trembling but raised high. Saria's heart thundered, torn between fury and respect. She wanted to strike him down, but she also wanted him to stand, because if he fell, then so would the fire that reminded her of who she once was. And if that fire died, she would be nothing but steel again. The breaking point came in silence. Their weapons clashed one final time, sparks bursting in the air. Kale's blade slid across her spear, striking her chest once more. The crack split wider, the light inside her armor bursting like a star. Saria gasped, stumbling back, her body trembling as the glow spread. The armor pulsed like a living heart, rejecting her, rejecting the battle. Her soldiers stepped back in shock, some even dropping their weapons. The legend of their commander was falling before their eyes. Kale dropped to one knee, his strength almost gone, but his eyes locked on hers, and he whispered with the last of his breath, "You're not unbreakable. You're just like me." Her spear wavered, her pride screamed, but her spirit broke, not from defeat, but from truth. Her greatest weakness had never been steel. It was the fear of being seen, the fear of being human. And now, before the eyes of two armies, she was seen at last. The battlefield was silent. The alien army that once roared in triumph now stood frozen, their eyes locked on their commander. The humans, broken and bloodied, lifted their heads with disbelief, watching a miracle unfold. And in the middle of fire and smoke, Kale and Saria faced each other, both trembling, both near collapse. The light from the crack in Saria's chest glowed brighter than ever. It spread across her body like veins of fire, each pulse burning against her skin. Her armor, once her pride, now felt like chains trying to drag her into the dirt. She breathed heavily, her spear loose in her hands, her heart racing with confusion. Kale knelt, his sword tip buried in the ground to keep himself upright. Blood dripped from his side. His body screamed for rest, but his eyes refused to dim. He had no strength left to swing again, yet he still held his weapon ready. Not because he believed he could strike her down, but because he would not surrender. Saria looked at him, her enemy, her rival, the human who had shattered her legend. She saw no hatred in his eyes, no mockery, no fear. She only saw defiance, and beyond that, something deeper, a reflection of herself, a warrior who refused to kneel. Her soldiers shifted nervously, waiting for her to end him. One command, one strike, and the human would fall. But Saria's hands trembled, because deep inside she knew, killing him now would not bring her victory. It would only prove that her strength was nothing but armor and lies. Kale's lips moved, his voice weak but steady. "You can kill me," he whispered, "but you'll never break me." The words echoed through the silence, heavier than any weapon. They pierced her chest deeper than his sword ever had. Her spear lowered, the weight of her pride falling with it. Gasps rose from her army, disbelief spreading like wildfire. Never before had their commander hesitated. Never before had she lowered her weapon before an enemy. But now, in front of both armies, she did. Saria dropped her spear, the weapon striking the ground with a dull echo. The sound rang louder than thunder, louder than war drums. Her soldiers stared in shock, their faith shaken, their legend broken. But Saria no longer cared. She stepped forward, her glowing chest trembling with each breath. She looked down at Kale, who still clung to his sword despite his broken body. And she spoke, not as a commander, not as a legend, but as a warrior. "You have shown me the truth, human," she said, her voice raw. "Strength is not armor, it is spirit, and yours has broken mine." Kale tried to stand, his body collapsing beneath him. But when he looked up at her, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Because he knew what her words meant. The battle was over. Saria turned to her soldiers, her voice carrying across the flames. "Lower your weapons," she commanded. Her army hesitated, confusion spreading. "Do it," she roared. "This war is finished." Slowly, hesitantly, the alien army obeyed. Weapons fell to the ground, the sounds echoing like falling chains. The humans gasped. Some wept. Others shouted in triumph. But Kale only closed his eyes, too weak to celebrate. Saria knelt before him, her shadow falling over his broken form. Not in surrender to a human, but in acknowledgement of truth. The unbreakable commander bowed to the spirit of a single soldier. And in that moment, a legend ended, and another was born. The story would spread across worlds. That one human, with a broken sword, had cracked the pride of an empire. That the strongest warrior of an alien race had chosen not to crush her enemy, but to honor him. And that her greatest weakness had never been steel, but the fear of facing her own heart. Kale opened his eyes one last time, hearing the silence of the battlefield. His sword slipped from his hand, his body falling forward. But before he struck the ground, Saria caught him, holding him steady. "You will not fall today," she whispered, her voice softer than the flames. The war was over, but their story had only just begun.